Here is part one of the story, written in simple, natural English and kept human-centric. The late afternoon sun rested softly on the windows of the small diner, casting warm golden stripes across the tables. It was the kind of place where people came for a quiet meal, not for anything dramatic or exciting. Most days passed in gentle silence, except for the sound of plates clinking and low conversations. But on this particular day, something unusual was about to unfold, something no one in the room saw coming. Evan pushed open the door with a tired sigh, stepping inside with the look of someone who had been carrying far too much on his shoulders for too long. He wasn't dressed like someone coming to relax. His shirt was slightly wrinkled from rushing, his tie loosened, and he kept checking the time on his watch as if every second mattered. He wasn't angry, just worn down in the way people get when life has been pulling them in every direction. He chose a booth near the window and sat down heavily, almost sinking into the cushions. He rubbed his temples for a moment before looking around. The diner had a soft glow to it, the kind that came from warm lights and the smell of fresh food. It was calm, but Evan didn't feel calm inside. He was simply trying to catch his breath from the day. A young waitress approached his table, holding a small notepad. Her name was Lila. She moved gently, like someone who didn't want to disturb anything around her. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and there was a quiet kindness in her eyes, even though she barely spoke. "Hi, what can I get for you today?" she asked with a small, polite smile. Evan looked up, surprised by her soft voice. "Just a coffee for now, and maybe a burger later." Layla nodded and wrote it down. "Sure, I'll bring the coffee right out." She turned to leave, but as she walked away, something in the corner of the diner caught Evan's eye. It was an upright piano old, with scratches on the wood and keys slightly yellowed with age. It didn't seem like it got much attention. When Lila returned with his coffee, Evan nodded toward the piano. "That thing ever get used?" he asked casually. Lila looked over at it, her expression tightening just a little, so small that someone less observant might have missed it. "Not really," she said. "It's been here for years, but not many people sit down to play." Evan lifted his eyebrows. "You know how to play?" She hesitated, just for a breath. "I used to. A long time ago." Something about the way she said it caught Evan's attention. Maybe it was the quiet sadness tucked behind her words. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe he simply wanted a moment of distraction from his stressful day. "You used to?" he repeated. "Come on, that means you still can." Layla shook her head quickly. "No, it's been years. I don't play anymore." Her tone wasn't rude, just firm, like she wanted the topic to end there, but Evan wasn't ready to let it go. "Just one song." "I bet you're still good." She laughed softly, almost nervously. "I'm really not." "You're probably better than you think," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "What's the harm in trying?" A couple of customers sitting at nearby tables glanced over with interest. Leela shifted uncomfortably, feeling eyes on her. "I should really keep working," she said. "It's busy today?" Evan looked around the diner. It definitely wasn't busy. A few people spread throughout the room, mostly quiet, some on their phones, some finishing early dinners. "You've got a minute," he said. His tone was friendly, not demanding, but still insistent enough to put pressure on her. Lila glanced toward the piano again, and this time her eyes carried a deeper emotions, something like fear mixed with memories she didn't want to reopen. "I don't really play in front of people," she said quietly. "Then think of this as practice," Evan said. "No pressure." It was ironic, because everything about the situation felt like pressure to her. More customers had noticed the conversation, though they pretended not to stare. People naturally became curious when something unusual happened in a place. where life usually stayed quiet and predictable. Really, Layla said again. I don't think I can. But Evan smiled as though he were encouraging a friend. I insist. Not in a bad way, I promise. I think it'd be nice. And honestly, I could use a moment of something peaceful today. That last sentence softened something inside her. She wasn't the kind of person who liked to disappoint others. And the way he said it tired. Sincere made her feel that playing one simple tune wouldn't be the worst thing she could do. Still, she didn't move right away. She stood beside the table with her hands gently gripping her notepad, thinking quietly. The moment stretched long enough that Evan finally added, If it helps, I'll stop asking afterward. Leela exhaled slowly, her eyes drifting toward the piano again. Okay, she said at last, though the words sounded like it was pulled out of her. Just a short one. Then I really have to get back to work. Evan raised a hand as if taking an oath. Fair deal. She tucked her notepad into her apron pocket and walked toward the piano. Her steps were small and careful, as if she was walking toward something uncertain. Everyone's attention began shifting ever so slightly, first glances, then quiet observation. Chairs stopped moving. Conversations softened. Even the sound of the kitchen faded into the background. Lila stood before the piano for a moment, just looking at it. Up close, it looked even older. She touched the edge of the wooden frame lightly with her fingertips, the way someone might touch a memory they aren't sure they want to revisit. She pulled the bench out slowly and sat down, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap. Her fingers trembled a little, something she hoped nobody noticed. Evan watched from his booth, leaning forward slightly, sensing there was more to her reaction than simple shyness. Something about her posture, the way she breathed in deeply before lifting her hands, hinted at a story beneath the surface. Lila placed her fingers gently on the keys, not pressing them yet, just letting them rest. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to gather courage or remember something buried far beneath the noise of everyday life. The diner had gone nearly silent now. A few customers glanced at each other with anticipation. One older couple smiled softly, clearly hoping for something sweet to brighten their meal. A young man near the back set down his phone so quietly it was barely audible. Lila opened her eyes. Her shoulders rose as she took another deep breath, then slowly dropped as she released it. She seemed to shrink into herself for a moment, unsure, fragile, but at the same time, there was a deep strength she didn't seem to realize she still carried. I really haven't played in years, she murmured to no one in particular. Evan heard her anyway. Just try, he said softly from across the room. She didn't look back at him. Instead, she lowered her eyes to the keys, hesitating just long enough to make everyone wonder if she might back out after all. Then, ever so gently, she pressed a single note. The sound rang through the diner, soft but clear, floating into every corner of the room. It was a simple note, but it carried something warm with it, something that made a few people sit up a little straighter. For a moment, Lila just listened to it fade. Then she lifted her other hand and tried a second note, then a third, as though testing the water before stepping in fully. Evan watched her carefully. The tiredness he had walked in with seemed to lessen, replaced by curiosity and something close to admiration. Lila's fingers hovered again, unsure, trembling lightly, but there was a spark beginning to grow inside her, one she perhaps hadn't felt in a very long time. She wasn't playing a song yet. Not really. But something was stirring. A beginning. A moment that would soon become much bigger than either she or Evan expected, and the whole diner waited, breath held, as if they all sensed it too. The diner had gone unusually quiet, as if the whole room was holding its breath along with Lila. She sat there at the old piano, her fingers still resting on the keys after those first few soft notes. It wasn't a song yet, just a beginning, something small and unsure. But even that was enough to shift the entire atmosphere. Evan watched her from his booth, the tension in his shoulders easing without him really noticing. He had walked in looking for nothing more than a cup of coffee and a break from a stressful day. But now he found himself fully focused on the young woman at the piano. Something about her hesitation, her quiet presence, made him forget everything else. Lila swallowed gently, her eyes lowered toward the keys. Her heart was beating faster than she wanted it to. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room drifting toward her. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. In fact, she did her best to avoid it whenever she could. She pressed another key, then another soft, almost testing. The notes were uneven, like someone trying to remember a language they once spoke fluently. A couple seated nearby exchanged small smiles, leaning forward slightly. A young girl at a table with her parents lifted her chin to see better. Even the worker behind the counter paused, wiping a glass. Lila knew they were watching. She could feel it in the air, and it made her want to stop, stand up, and return to her normal duties. She was only a waitress here. She served food, refilled drinks, and kept her head down. Music didn't belong in her life anymore, not since she gave it up years ago. But her fingers didn't leave the keys. Maybe it was because she didn't want to seem rude. Maybe it was because stopping now would draw even more attention. Or maybe, somewhere deep inside her, there was a part of her that missed this feeling, the way the cool keys felt under her fingertips, the way sound filled the air when she pressed them. She tried a small melody, a simple one she learned when she was very young, the kind of tune that stays in a person's memory, even when everything else fades. Her hands were unsteady at first, but slowly the notes began to connect. Evan leaned back, surprised by how gentle and warm the sound was. He hadn't expected much, maybe a clumsy attempt from someone who hadn't played in years. But there was something real in her touch, something heartfelt. Even if the melody wasn't perfect. As the music grew a little stronger, people turned more openly in their seats. Not in an intrusive way, but in a curious, hopeful one. The diner wasn't a place where interesting things usually happened. It was a quiet spot people visited for everyday meals. So when something out of the ordinary occurred, folks paid attention. Lila tried not to look at anyone. Her gaze stayed on the keys, her posture still slightly tense. She didn't feel confident, far from it. Her mind kept racing with thoughts like, what if I mess up? What if they laugh? What if he regrets asking? But as she continued playing, a strange calmness began to grow inside her. It wasn't strong, but it felt like a small light in a dim room. The melody flowed more smoothly now, her fingers beginning to remember movements they hadn't made in years. The music drifted gently through the diner, blending with the warm hum of the place. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was soft and emotional, like a memory brought back to life. One of the older men sitting near the door lowered his newspaper and watched with interest. A woman sipping tea smiled quietly, as if the music touched something inside her. Even the cook peeked his head out from the kitchen window for a moment, listening. Lila didn't notice any of this. Her world had shrunk down to the piano keys and the melody growing beneath her hands. But halfway through the tune, she caught herself thinking, what am I doing? Why did I agree to this? Her fingers hesitated for a moment. The music faltered. She almost pulled her hands away, but then she heard a soft voice behind her. You're doing great, Evan said. It wasn't loud, just enough for her to hear. She didn't turn around, but something about his tone, calm, encouraging, pushed her forward. She took a steady breath and continued. Her touch grew a little stronger. Not confident, but no longer fragile. She began adding small runs of notes, tiny flourishes, that hinted at a deeper skill. Anyone listening closely could sense there was more inside her. Something waiting to rise. The young girl at the family table rested her chin on her hands and whispered, "She's really good." Her mother nodded with a smile. "Yes, she is." As the melody flowed, Lila's mind drifted not toward the people watching her now, but toward memories she had tried to bury. She saw flashes of herself as a child, sitting at a different piano, in a different room, with sunlight spilling through the windows. She remembered practicing scales, learning songs, dreaming of playing on stages she never reached. Then the memories shifted the music lessons she had to stop, the changes in her family's life, the responsibilities that piled up faster than she had been ready for. Playing piano became a luxury she couldn't afford, then a habit she didn't have time for, and finally a dream she let slip away. A soft ache stirred in her chest. Not painful, just bittersweet. She kept playing, though, because for these few moments, it felt like she was borrowing something from her old life, something she didn't realize she missed as much as she did. Evan watched the way her shoulders slowly relaxed, the way her hands moved more fluidly. Her expression changed too, still nervous, but with a growing sense of connection to the music. Without meaning to, he smiled. The tune continued for another minute, winding softly through the room. It wasn't flawless. She missed a note here and there, her fingers slipping slightly when her nerves got the better of her. But the imperfections didn't matter. If anything, they made the moment feel real and human. Then she reached the final notes of the melody. Her fingers slowed, pressing the last few keys, one by one, gentle, careful. Each note lingered in the warm air of the diner. When the final sound faded, Lila let her hands fall into her lap. She drew in a shaky breath, her heart still beating faster than normal. Her cheeks were warm with embarrassment. She didn't dare turn around yet. The diner was silent, more silent than she expected. She thought they might clap or whisper or return to their meals quickly, pretending nothing unusual had happened. But instead, the quiet stretched for several seconds, long enough for her to wonder if something had gone wrong. She finally turned just enough to peek over her shoulder. Everyone was staring, but not in the way she feared. They looked moved, calm, almost peaceful. The woman with the tea gave her a warm smile. The older man nodded at her in quiet respect. The little girl grinned openly. Lila blinked in surprise. And one person began clapping, then another, and soon soft applause filled the room. Not loud or overwhelming, just gentle appreciation. Lila felt her face grow warmer. She quickly shook her head. "It was nothing," she murmured. But Evan stood up from his booth and stepped closer, stopping a respectful distance from her so she didn't feel crowded. "That wasn't nothing," he said quietly. "That was honestly really nice." Lila lowered her eyes again, unsure what to say. Praise wasn't something she was used to receiving. "You sure you haven't played in a long time?" he asked with a small smile. She nodded. "A very long time." "Well," he said, "it doesn't seem that way." A couple of customers echoed his sentiment with soft words or nods as they resumed their meals. The room slowly shifted back to normal sounds, forks, dishes, low chatter, but there was a lighter feeling in the air now, a quiet warmth that hadn't been there before. Lila stood from the piano bench, smoothing her apron nervously. "I should get back to work," she said softly. "Of course," Evan replied. "Thank you for playing." She nodded and began walking back toward the counter, trying to gather herself. She felt strangely unsettled, not in a bad way, but in a way that suggested the moment had stirred something she didn't know how to deal with. As she passed by one of the tables, the older woman sitting there said, "You have a gift, dear." Lila paused, surprised, and gave a small, humble smile before continuing on. When she reached the counter, She let out a slow breath she had been holding. She placed her hand over her chest for a moment. Feeling her heart finally calming, the piano stood quietly in the corner again, just as it always had. But now it felt different, like it had woken up from a long sleep. And as Lila picked up her notepad and returned to her duties, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had woken up to. Evan watched her as she moved around the diner more thoughtfully than before. He knew he had pushed her into it, maybe more than he should have. But he also sensed that the moment meant something to her, even if she wouldn't admit it. He sat back down, taking another sip of his coffee, which had grown lukewarm without him noticing. For the first time that day, he felt a little lighter. Neither of them knew it yet, but the simple, hesitant melody Lila played would be the spark for something much bigger, something that would change not only the mood of the day, but the direction of both their lives. The last notes of Lila's melody still seemed to float in the air, long after she stepped away from the piano. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm plates clinking, soft conversations rising again, but something in the atmosphere felt changed, as if everyone in the room had witnessed something delicate and unexpected. Lila tried to settle back into her work, moving between tables with her notepad and a practiced smile. But inside, she was unsettled. Her hands still trembled faintly, not from fear anymore, but from something she didn't have a name for. It felt like a door inside her had cracked open, letting in old memories she had pushed away. She wiped down a counter, even though it was already clean. She adjusted salt and pepper shakers that didn't really need adjusting. Anything to distract her mind from the music still echoing in her chest. But the more she tried to bury the feeling, the stronger it became. Meanwhile, Evan watched her from across the room. He wasn't staring, just observing with quiet curiosity. When he first pushed her to play, he hadn't expected much. Maybe a simple tune, a modest attempt, something light. But what he heard, there was something deeper in it. Something emotional. It made him wonder. He finished his coffee slowly, letting the warmth fade from the cup in his hands. He wasn't in a hurry anymore. The stress of the morning, the rush of his day, all of it felt distant now. He waited until Lila passed near his booth again. "Hey," he said gently. She paused, trying to compose herself. "Yes, do you need something?" "I just wanted to say thank you again," he replied. "You didn't have to play, but I'm glad you did." Layla gave a small nod. "It was just a simple tune." "Maybe," he said, "but it meant something. You could feel it." She didn't respond. Compliments were harder for her to handle than criticism. Praise made her uncomfortable, made her feel exposed. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot," Evan added. "I hope you didn't feel forced." She glanced down at her notepad. "It's fine, really." But the way she said it wasn't dismissive. It was more like she was unsure what she felt. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lila gently excused herself to take care of another table. Evan didn't stop her. He understood enough to know she needed space, that the older couple near the window called her over next. They were regulars, kind faces that always left generous tips. The woman reached out and touched Lila's arm lightly when she came by. "You play beautifully," she said, her voice warm. Lila blushed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you. You should keep practicing," the older man added. "You have something special." Lila nodded politely, but their words lingered in her mind like a soft echo. As she moved on, she noticed the young girl from earlier, watching her with wide eyes. The girl's parents were busy talking, but the child leaned over the table toward Lila as she passed. "Do you play lots of songs?" the girl asked. "Not really," Lila replied with a gentle smile. "I used to, but I stopped." "Why?" Lila hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Life got busy." The girl nodded thoughtfully, as if she understood more than her age suggested. "You should play again." It sounded pretty. Something tightened in Lila's chest. Children had a way of saying simple things that felt strangely powerful. She thanked the girl and walked away, feeling the words cling to her like morning dew. She returned behind the counter, reaching for a pile of menus to organize. The piano stood quietly behind her, but she could feel it not as an object in the room, but as a presence. A question she wasn't ready to answer. After a few minutes, she sensed someone approaching again. She expected a customer needing a refill, but when she looked up, it was Evan coming toward the counter with his empty coffee mug. She straightened, feeling a little nervous without knowing why. "Need a refill?" she asked. "No," he said softly. "I actually came to apologize. I shouldn't have pushed you earlier." Lila blinked, surprised. "Really, it's fine. I know I didn't mean any harm," he continued, setting the mug down. "But I realized afterward. I didn't know anything about your past or why you stopped playing. I just assumed it was easy for you. And it clearly wasn't." She looked at the mug instead of him. His honesty touched her more than she expected. "I don't think your request was wrong," she said quietly. "It just caught me off guard." "I understand," he replied. "And I hope you won't be upset with me for it." Lila shook her head. "I'm not upset." He let out a breath of relief. Good. A small silence hung between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a pause where something genuine could be said. "You were really talented," he said softly. "Even with such a simple tune, you made the whole room stop." Lila swallowed. "I don't know about that." "I do," he replied, his voice steady. She didn't know how to respond, so she stayed quiet. Across the diner, someone called for her. She gave Evan a quick nod and hurried off to help. But even as she moved between tables, she felt his words following her. "You made the whole room stop." That it wasn't the kind of compliment she could easily forget. The next few minutes passed with her taking orders, delivering plates, and clearing tables. She worked mechanically, but her thoughts kept drifting to the piano, to the feeling under her fingertips, to the sound rising in the air dot. She wondered if the customers would still be talking about it later. She wondered if the moment would stay with them like it stayed with her. Eventually, Evan finished his meal. He asked for the check, paid at the counter, and left a tip much larger than necessary. When Lila went to pick it up, she found a small note written on the receipt. "You have something beautiful. Don't hide it." Her breath caught slightly. She looked toward the door, half expecting him to still be there. But he had already stepped outside, walking down the sidewalk with a calmer stride than when he had arrived. The bell above the diner door shook softly as it closed behind him. Lila folded the note and slipped it carefully into her apron pocket. She wasn't sure why she kept it, but she couldn't make herself throw it away. For the rest of her shift, she moved a little slower, as though her mind was somewhere far away. But it wasn't far at all. It was right across the room, sitting silently in the corner, the piano. When the dinner rush ended and the diner became quiet again, Lila found herself wiping down the tables near it. She didn't need to. Someone else had already cleaned them earlier, but she drifted there anyway. She stood in front of the piano for a moment, looking at the worn keys, the scratches on the wood, the chipped corner. It wasn't much to look at, but to her it held a strange pull. She rested her hand lightly on the top of it. Then she lifted the wooden cover, revealing the keys once more. Her fingers hovered above them. She didn't know if she should play again. She didn't even know what she wanted. But something had changed inside her. She pressed one note dot, just one dot. It echoed gently in the quiet room dot. She closed the cover again, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. Maybe tomorrow she would play more. Maybe not, but for the first time in years, the idea didn't scare her dot as she walked away. She didn't notice the older cook watching her with a knowing smile. Nor did she see the young girl waving at her through the diner window as she left with her family. But one thing was certain. Lila wasn't the same person who woke up that morning, and neither was the day. Something had shifted, something that was only beginning. When the day finally came for the small gathering at the cafe, the air carried a mix of excitement and quiet nerves. It wasn't a formal event, nothing like a concert or a performance with posters and tickets. It was just a simple evening where a few regulars, some curious strangers, and a handful of people who had heard whispers of a girl with an unbelievable gift came to listen. But even if the room was small, the moment felt big. She arrived a little earlier than planned, her hands tucked in the sleeves of a simple sweater. She wasn't dressed up in anything fancy. She didn't try to look like a performer. She didn't even walk in with the confidence of someone about to amaze a crowd. Instead, she moved quietly, almost trying not to draw attention to herself. Most of the people didn't even notice her until she took a seat near the piano. The cafe owner gave her a gentle nod from behind the counter, as if saying, "You're safe here. Everything will be okay." She gave a tiny nod back, though her shoulders still seemed a little tight. Across the room, the waiter who had discovered her talent the week before was trying his best to look calm. But every time he glanced at the piano or at her, his heart sped up. He knew what she could do. He had seen the way she transformed when her fingers touched the keys. He had watched her fill a room with something impossible to explain. And he also knew she didn't see herself the way he did. She didn't walk through the world thinking she had a gift. She didn't have the pride, the belief, or even the certainty that her music deserved to be heard. She simply played because something inside her needed to. That was what made her different. That was what made her special. The evening moved slowly at first. People ordered drinks, chatted softly, and settled into their seats. A few whispered to each other while glancing her way, wondering if she was really the girl they'd been hearing about. Some thought the story had been exaggerated. Others assumed it was just another social media rumor that got carried too far. The piano sat quietly in the center of the room, cleaned and polished earlier that morning. A single lamp above it cast a warm glow over the keys, making them look almost inviting. She stared at it from her seat, her fingers pressed together lightly, as if trying to warm up without being noticed. Eventually, the cafe owner walked to the middle of the room and cleared his throat. The room quieted almost instantly. He didn't give a speech. He didn't hype her up or make her feel like she was being pushed onto a stage. He simply said, "Thank you all for being here tonight. We have someone who will be sharing her music with us. Please give your attention to her and just enjoy the moment." That was all he needed to say. She took a slow breath, stood up, and walked toward the piano. Every step seemed to echo louder than it should have. The room wasn't huge, but in that moment, it felt like every eye was on her. She didn't look around, though. She kept her gaze on the floor, then on the piano as she reached it. When she sat down, the bench made a soft creak. She lifted her hands, but they hovered above the keys for a moment without touching them. The room held its breath. Inside her chest, her heartbeat felt almost noisy, but she closed her eyes. That was her way of blocking out the world, of finding the stillness where her music lived. Then she began. The first notes were gentle, like a small ripple on calm water. They weren't loud or dramatic. They weren't meant to shock or impress. They simply drifted into the air, warm and soft, filling the room with something delicate and emotional. People leaned in without realizing it. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then with more certainty. It was as if she were having a quiet conversation with the piano, just her and the music, no one else in the world. She didn't watch the keys. She didn't need to. Her hands knew exactly where to go. The melody grew fuller, richer, unfolding like a story being told without words. Some people in the audience closed their eyes. Others watched her hands with amazement, wondering how someone so young and so gentle-looking could create something so deep. The waiter stood near the counter, frozen in place. He had expected her to be good, of course, but even he wasn't prepared for what he was hearing now. It was different from the afternoon he had first heard her play. This time she wasn't hiding. She wasn't holding back. She wasn't trying to stay small. Instead, she let the music rise, swell, and reach places she never showed the world before. The room was so quiet that the soft hum of the cafe refrigerator in the back could be heard between the notes. No one whispered. No one looked at their phone. Everyone seemed afraid to blink, afraid to break the fragile magic in the air. Halfway through the piece, her expression changed. Her eyebrows softened, her shoulders relaxed, and her hands moved with a kind of peaceful confidence. She wasn't nervous anymore. The music had taken over, guiding her instead of the other way around. The melody shifted into something more hopeful, like the sound of dawn slowly rising after a long night. It wasn't flashy or complicated, but it touched something real inside every person listening. A woman sitting near the front placed a hand on her chest, moved by emotions she couldn't explain. A couple sitting near the window held hands a little tighter. Even the cafe owner, who had heard countless musicians play over the years, felt his throat tighten. The last minute of her performance felt like a gentle goodbye. The notes softened again, becoming almost whisper-like. When she reached the final chord, she let it linger, letting the sound fade naturally into the silence. Then she lowered her hands, but the room didn't clap right away. For several seconds, everything stayed still. People seemed to be processing what they had just heard, letting the moment settle into them. Finally, someone near the back began to applaud. Then another joined, and another. Within seconds, the room erupted with gentle but heartfelt claps. No one was cheering loudly or shouting. It wasn't that kind of applause. It was the kind that came from being deeply touched, from feeling grateful for something special. She lifted her gaze slightly, surprised by the reaction. Her cheeks warmed in the soft light. She didn't smile widely, but a small, quiet smile appeared for a moment before she looked down again. The waiter clapped the hardest, though he tried not to be too obvious about it. He knew she didn't like attention, but he also knew she deserved every bit of it. As the applause faded, people began to talk quietly among themselves. Some whispered about how unexpected her talent was. Others wondered where she learned to play like that. A few even asked the cafe owner if she gave lessons or if she would perform again. She sat for a moment longer at the piano, her fingers lightly touching the keys as if she wasn't ready to walk away yet. Playing had given her something she didn't even know she needed, a sense of belonging, a sense of being understood without having to explain a single word. When she finally stood up, she didn't rush toward the door or hide in a corner. She walked calmly back to her seat. People smiled at her as she passed. Some nodded with admiration. A few whispered simple compliments like beautiful or thank you. She didn't respond out loud, but she gave small nods in return. The waiter approached her with a glass of water, his hands slightly shaky from the excitement he was trying to contain. "You were amazing," he said softly. Handing her the glass, she looked at it, then at him. "Was it okay?" "More than okay," he said. "You moved everyone here." She didn't answer right away, but the look in her eyes showed something had changed. She wasn't doubting herself as much now. She wasn't shrinking from the attention. She was beginning to see what he had seen from the very beginning. The rest of the evening flowed gently. People stayed longer than usual, talking about the performance, replaying the melody in their minds. A few asked her polite questions, and though she answered quietly, she didn't seem overwhelmed anymore. As the cafe slowly emptied and the night grew quieter, She sat by the piano one last time. Not to play, but just to touch the keys lightly, as if saying thank you. And somewhere deep inside, a new feeling began to grow, not pride, not confidence exactly, but a small spark of possibility, a spark that would soon lead to something much bigger. The night after her small performance at the cafe stayed in her mind like a quiet echo. Even as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she could still feel the soft vibration of the piano keys under her fingers. She remembered the way the room had fallen silent, the way people had listened with full attention, the way their eyes softened when her music reached them. She had never felt anything like it before, but the warmth of that memory came something else, a kind of uncertainty that grew slowly and wouldn't leave her alone. She wondered if she had only imagined the reaction. Maybe the people clapped because they felt like they should. Maybe the melody wasn't as beautiful as they made it seem. Maybe she had just been lucky. Still, deep inside, she also felt something new. It was small, like a quiet whisper, but it was there. A sense that maybe she had done something meaningful without meaning to. The next morning, she returned to her usual routine. She walked to work with her eyes down and her hands in her pockets. The town looked the same as ever, small shops opening their doors, early customers buying their morning drinks, the sky covered in soft clouds that made everything look peaceful. She didn't expect anything different. She didn't expect anyone to treat her differently either. But things had changed. When she entered the cafe, a few regular customers looked up. Not in a dramatic way, not with loud greetings or big reactions, but with a kind of gentle recognition. A couple smiled at her. One older man nodded kindly, as if he knew something about her now that he hadn't known before. She felt her cheeks warm as she quietly walked behind the counter to start her shift. The waiter was already there, arranging trays and wiping down tables. When he saw her, his face brightened. "Morning," he said, sounding more cheerful than usual. She gave a small nod. "Morning." He watched her for a moment, then asked, "How are you feeling today?" She hesitated. "I'm not sure." He smiled a little. "It was a big night. It's okay to feel a lot of things at once." She didn't respond, but she appreciated his words. He always seemed to know when not to push. He understood that she wasn't someone who expressed her emotions easily. As the morning went on, something unexpected started to happen. People came in and asked quietly, "Is she here?" Some asked the waiter. Some asked the owner. Some even looked around the cafe, almost searching. When they saw her, they smiled politely, but didn't crowd her. They didn't approach her with questions or pressure. They simply wanted to be in the same room with the girl whose music had touched them the night before. It made her feel both nervous and strangely comforted. At lunchtime, a woman approached the counter. She looked thoughtful and a little shy. "Excuse me," the woman said softly. "I wanted to say something to you." The girl looked up slowly, unsure of what to expect. "I was here last night," the woman continued. "Your music. It made me think of someone I lost a long time ago. It reminded me of a feeling I hadn't felt in years. So I just wanted to say thank you." The girl blinked, surprised. Her voice came out very quiet. I'm glad it helped you." The woman smiled warmly before stepping away. Moments like that happened more than once throughout the day. Not constantly, and not in overwhelming ways, but just enough for her to realize something important. Her music mattered to people, but the biggest surprise came in the late afternoon. The cafe owner walked over to her as she was cleaning tables. He held a small envelope. "Someone left this for you," he said. She looked at it, confused. "For me?" He nodded and handed it to her. She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. "Your performance was beyond beautiful. I run a small music studio across town. We often hold community gatherings, small events, and beginner workshops. If you're ever interested in exploring your talent further, even in private lessons or quiet sessions, you're welcome there. No pressure. No obligations. Just potential. At the bottom was a name one she didn't recognize, and a phone number. She stared at the note for a long moment, unsure what to feel. A music studio? Someone thought she was good enough for that? The idea felt impossible, almost unreal. The waiter noticed her expression. "What is it?" She handed him the note. He read it, and his eyes widened with excitement. "This is amazing. You should go." She shook her head. "I don't know if I can." "Why not?" he asked. She searched for the right words. "Because I'm not a real musician. I only play what I feel. I don't know anything about lessons or studios." He folded the note gently and handed it back to her. "Maybe that's exactly why they want you," he said softly. "Because you play with heart. That's something you can't teach." She didn't answer, but she tucked the note into her pocket. As the days passed, more small changes began to happen. People continued to ask about her. The cafe felt warmer, more alive, as if her music had added something invisible to the air. Customers stayed longer. Conversations were softer. Smiles were easier. And the girl, though still quiet and reserved, seemed to stand just a little straighter. One evening, after a long shift, the waiter approached her again. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She nodded. "Will you play again? Maybe this weekend? People keep asking, and I think it would mean something to them." She hesitated. Playing once had been hard enough. She wasn't sure she had the courage to do it again. "You don't have to," he added quickly. "Only if you want to." She looked at the piano across the room. It sat quietly in its corner, the same soft lamp shining above it like before. She took a slow breath. "Maybe I could, but only something simple." His face lit up. "That's more than enough." So the decision was made. That weekend, the cafe filled again. Not with a loud crowd, but with the same kind of gentle audience that respected the space, the music, and her quiet nature. When she sat down to play this time, she wasn't trembling. She wasn't holding her breath. She wasn't trying to shrink. Instead, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to remember what it felt like to let music tell a story, her story. The melody she played that night was different from the first. It was softer, slower, almost reflective. It carried the gentle weight of everything she had been feeling that week, the uncertainty, the gratitude, the slow opening of a new chapter she hadn't expected. As she played, something else happened. She began to imagine possibilities. Possibilities she had never let herself imagine before. When the final note faded, the room waited again, that same breathless stillness filling the space. Then came the warm, steady applause. This time, she didn't doubt it. She let herself believe it. After the show, she stood next to the waiter and watched people leave the cafe with soft smiles and warm expressions. "You did it again," he said quietly. She looked at the floor, then at him. "It felt easier this time." "That's how it starts," he replied. Little by little. As they cleaned up together, she found herself thinking about the envelope in her drawer at home. The music studio. The invitation. The possibility. For the first time, she wondered if she should say yes. And deep inside her, something finally shifted. She no longer saw herself as a girl who happened to play piano. She began to see herself as someone who had something to share, someone who could grow, someone who might, just maybe, be meant for something more. And even though she wasn't ready to take the next step yet, she felt herself getting closer, one quiet note at a time. The days that followed her second performance were calmer, but something quiet and steady continued to change inside her. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't loud, but it was real. She felt it every time she walked into the cafe and saw the piano sitting there, waiting. She felt it when customers smiled at her, as though they already knew a small piece of her heart. And she felt it late at night, when she lay awake, thinking about the envelope from the music studio still tucked away in her drawer. She hadn't called the number yet. She didn't fully understand why. Fear, maybe. Or disbelief. Or simply the uncertainty of stepping into a world she didn't know. But the thought stayed with her, lingering softly like a melody she hadn't finished playing. One afternoon, after the cafe had finished its usual rush of customers, she found a quiet moment to sit by the window. The sky outside was pale and soft, the kind that made the whole town look gentler. She watched people pass by, each one with their own story, their own path. She wondered what her path was supposed to be. The waiter noticed her sitting alone and approached with 2 cups of warm tea. "Here," he said, placing one in front of her. "You look like you're thinking too much." She let out a quiet breath. "Maybe I am." He sat across from her. "Is it about the music studio?" She didn't answer at first. She simply wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting the heat settle into her palms. "I'm not sure what will happen if I go," she finally said. "You don't have to know," he replied gently. "You just have to try." His words weren't pushy. They weren't demanding. They were just soft reminders that sometimes the smallest steps mattered the most. For the rest of the day, she thought about his words. And when she went home that night, she took the envelope out of the drawer and set it on her table. She stared at it for a long time, reading the handwritten note over and over. Finally, she picked up her phone dot. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the number. She didn't know what she would say. She didn't know what they would say. But the call connected. A warm voice answered. "Hello?" She took a small breath. I received your note. About the studio." "Ah," the voice replied with gentle recognition. "I'm so glad you called. We'd love for you to visit. No pressure, just come by and take a look. See how you feel." She swallowed nervously. "Okay, I can do that." "Whenever you're ready," the voice said kindly. When she hung up, she felt a strange mix of relief and fear. But she also felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: courage. Quiet but real. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual. She stood in front of her closet, unsure of what to wear for something like this. Eventually, she chose simple clothes, the same kind she always wore, because she didn't need to pretend to be someone else. Before leaving, she paused and glanced in the mirror. She didn't see a confident musician staring back. She didn't see someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She saw the same girl-shy, gentle, unsure, but with a new hint of determination. The walk to the studio took about 20 minutes. The building was modest, with warm lights shining through the windows and soft music drifting from inside. It didn't feel intimidating. It felt welcoming. When she stepped inside, the same warm voice greeted her. "You made it. I'm really glad." She gave a small nod, unable to say much. The studio owner, an older woman with kind eyes, showed her around. There were rooms for beginners, rooms for advanced players, and a small hall where people sometimes gathered for casual performances. The walls were covered with photos of past students smiling beside their instruments. "This is a place for growth," the woman said. "Not pressure, not competition, just growth. We'd love to help you explore your talent in whatever way feels right for you." The girl listened quietly. She didn't make any promises. She didn't sign anything. She just absorbed the energy of the place. Then the woman led her to a small practice room. Inside was a piano. Old, not fancy, just clean, polished. "And ready?" "If you'd like," the woman said. You can play something. Only if you feel comfortable. She hesitated, then slowly walked toward the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She took a breath and closed her eyes. The first notes she played were soft, like a careful greeting. But as the melody began to form, she felt herself slipping into the place where fear no longer mattered. Her hands moved smoothly, gently, gracefully. When she finished, she opened her eyes. The woman was smiling. Not with awe, not with shock, but with genuine warmth. "You play with emotion," she said softly. "That's something special. If you ever want to come here regularly, we'd be honored to have you." The girl felt her chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with gratitude. "I think I'd like that," she whispered. And just like that, she took her first step into a new world. In the weeks that followed, she began visiting the studio after her shifts at the cafe. Sometimes she practiced alone. Sometimes she learned new techniques from gentle instructors who never rushed her. Sometimes she just sat and listened to others playing, absorbing their energy and letting it inspire her. The cafe customers noticed changes in her too. She smiled a little more. She stood a little taller. Her eyes held a quiet spark that hadn't been there before. And every weekend, she played at the CAFE Acute. Each performance carried a new layer, a new feeling, a new confidence. People continued to come, sometimes bringing friends or family, to witness the girl who played from the heart. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, the waiter approached her. "You've grown," he said softly. She looked shyly at the floor. "Maybe a little." "More than a little," he said with a quiet smile. She didn't respond. But deep inside, she knew he was right. Months passed this way, with steady improvement and slow, meaningful changes. Her world expanded. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but with gentle steps. And one afternoon, the cafe owner approached her. "There's something you should know," he said. "Someone from a nearby music event is interested in inviting you to perform. Nothing big, just a small show. But they heard about you through a customer who heard you play." She froze. "A show?" "Only if you want to," he said quickly. She thought about it. The old her would have refused immediately. But now, she wasn't the same girl she had been. "Maybe," she whispered. "I'll think about it." She did think about it over several days. And the more she thought, the more she realized that every step she had taken so far had been preparing her for something like this. When she finally said yes, the cafe owner, the waiter, and even some regular customers were quietly excited for her. The night of the event arrived. It was held in a small hall with warm lighting and a calm atmosphere. People filled the seats slowly, chatting quietly. She stepped onto the stage with steady hands. She wasn't trembling this time. She wasn't shrinking. She wasn't doubting herself. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and let everything she had learned, everything she had lived flow through her. The melody she played that night was full, deep, tender. Honest. It carried her journey, her fear, her hope, her growth. When she finished, the room rose into a gentle standing applause, and for the first time in her life, she lifted her head fully and allowed herself to truly see the audience. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't small. She wasn't unsure. She was a musician. A girl who had once tried to hide had now stepped into her own light. And though her journey was far from over, she was finally ready for whatever would come next, one honest note at a time.